everybody, welcome to The First Step, the talk show about having the hard conversations. Today I have with me, if you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Regan. And I'm Taran.
And today we're talking about the mixed community because we're all mixed. It's very convenient. Before we get into that, I want to read the promotional statement from the VCIC, which says, the Virginia Center for the Inclusive Communities is an 86-year-old organization that started in Lynchburg, Virginia, as the Virginia region of the National Conference of Christian and Jews, in a grassroots effort to address community concerns related to anti-Catholicism, anti-Semitism, and anti-Protestantism. Always a hard word to say. Community members took part in interfaith dialogues across Virginia. Over time, conversations grew to include other aspects of social identities like race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, class, and ability status. Today, VCIC is an independent nonprofit that works with schools, businesses, and communities to achieve success through inclusion. VCIC hosts programs year-round for students, including one-day forums like the Diversity Dialogue Day and the Prejudice Awareness Summit, and a week-long summer retreat called Connections. And if you want to find out more, you can follow them on their social media, which is Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, which you can find on our website, which is linked in our link tree, linked in our Instagram bio. There are so many links. Alright, so before we get started, I would just like to remind everyone that while your guys' responses are obviously very important and we should take them with respect, also remembering that they are only representing a portion of the community and that this is only quote-unquote the first step, and you shouldn't take everything they say as like law, if you get what I mean. So are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Cool beans. Alrighty, so we have for the first question. Alrighty, have you ever had to choose between your races? What would you say to those who are struggling with their identity?
Do you want to go first, Regan? Sure. Haven't necessarily had to choose, but there's definitely been a lot of like, oh, well, are you black or are you white? Like, did you know my dad's black, my mom's white? So when we have my mom's side of the thing, it's like, well, there's a completely different culture than I'm with my dad, so it's like, which one feels more like me? And I just don't really have an answer to that, you know? And people who are struggling to find who they are, I'd be like, well, just go with however you feel. You don't need to be defined by a race. You just are what you are. You know, you can't choose who your parents are. You can't choose that you're white. You can't choose that you're black. You can't choose anything. So you just are who you are, and race shouldn't really be a factor in that.
Yeah, I feel like I definitely, kind of similar to Regan, my dad is Iranian, he's brown, and my mom is white. I think that's definitely very different versus having like a mom from a different culture that's not like a white American. It is a different experience a little bit, just from like friends I've talked to. And then I think the other part that I've kind of always struggled with and like still am not completely sure about is that like how certain countries in the Middle East are classified, because some people would say that I'm not even mixed. A lot of people say that, but a lot of people also say that I'm half Asian and that I'm half white, and it does become a very confusing thing, like when you're a part of like a diaspora, I think is how you say it, like Asia. It's such a mixed bag. Like my family's from Iran, like sometimes they'll say Iranians are white, but then Pakistan, which is like right next to Iran, they'll say that's Asia. So it's like the differences between those two and like how that's viewed in society, I would say that's kind of like impacted the way that like I choose how to identify in like different aspects of my life. Like I never want people to like assume that I'm like trying to like connect with a culture that's not mine, which I don't always know why I preface things like that, but sometimes I do catch myself saying that. So I would say that maybe it's not like a choice that I've had to make, but it's more of a decision I've had to process. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, yeah, I see what you mean. I think it's really funny because I think all of it, as you guys were talking, I think I realized that all of us have a white parent. Like it's white and then something else.
Yeah.
And I'm like, did we get I think it's interesting, especially living in America, having a white parent, and also like the idea of like being white passing.
Yeah.
And like, because some people do get to be white passing and then some people don't get to be white passing, and it's just like people look at me and they're like, oh right, I forget that your dad's white. And I'm like, yeah, me too.
It's such a mixed bag. I know like especially I'm very white passing, and like I've in the past like couple of years, I would say, like obviously we lived in Virginia, which was a segregated state for a very long time, up until when my mom was born in 1965. And I often, like, sometimes I catch myself thinking about, like, how different would my life have been if I had, like, the same family and the same parents, but I'd just been born the same time as my mom. Because my life would be so different. And, like, I would not have the opportunities that I have today because of the way people view my parents' relationship. My parents wouldn't have even legally have been able to be married. So, like, I do think about that a lot, as, like, having that, like, white American parent versus, like, my brown parent, like, my mom and I, even though we have similar skin color, how different our lives would have turned out if we'd been born at the same time.
Yeah. I think that was the Supreme Court case, Loving versus Virginia,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It was in
yeah.
Virginia
Yeah,
because Virginia was
Yeah.
Virginia was racist.
Even
Yeah.
bad, like, I think the last
And I could be wrong on this, but I think like when they desegregated schools like officially like in all of Virginia was in like the early 1970s, and my family came here from Iran in the late 70s. So my dad missed being in a completely separated like school system by like 5 years.
That's insane.
Exactly, and like how different would things have turned out is like I've been thinking about that like the past like maybe like 2 or 3 years, I guess. I think maybe since like summer 2020 maybe. I think like that had never really occurred to me, or even like where I work now, I work at a country club, and like when that was formed during segregation, like how different would my employment opportunities be, and like how different like my eligibility for certain things would be. So like that stuck with me as well.
We were doing, I was talking with a couple work friends, and we were doing one of those rhetorical questions, or not rhetorical, we were answering the question. It was one of those hypothetical questions, is the word I'm looking for. And so the hypothetical question was like one of the classics of like, if you could time travel, where would you go? And I was like,
the worst people to answer that.
I was like, well, everywhere I go, I get hate crimed. I get hate crimed every other time. I get hate crimed now. And I'm still like, I can't go back in time because every era I go to, there's something wrong with me.
No, seriously.
And it's just kind of like, rats.
Yeah.
There goes my time traveling opportunity.
Yeah, see, if we went back in the day, if I existed, it would have been because of something not so friendly.
Yeah.
Like, because, you know, my dad would not have been a citizen and not a normal person, and my mom would have had to have been a slave owner.
Yeah.
You know, so that would have been interesting.
I probably wouldn't have even existed because I don't think anybody in
None
Iran
of
would
us
have wanted to
would.
come. Nobody in Iran would have wanted to come here before the revolution. Anyways, they were living lavish. Like they wouldn't have come here.
America, no.
They would have not even considered it. So yeah, I wouldn't even exist.
Dang.
Yeah. Fun
Dang.
story for all three of us.
So you guys have like Asian parents, so like both of your parents like actually came from like a different country.
Yeah.
But see, both of my parents were born here, so there's like, you know, that sort of, well, we're still American, but just in a different way. Because I've had my dad's parents, my black grandparents, talk about how, you know, their lives used to be, you know, before all this stuff happened, and how, you know, work was and how everything was so crazy. And my dad's such a traditional family, just thinking about it like, what did they have to go through for them to be like this? You know, they had to be strict with their kids, like, all right, you can't go after this time, you know, you can't do this, you can't do that, because if you do, you're gonna die. Yeah, sorry, you're either gonna go to jail and never get out, or you're just gonna be straight up shot, and that's it.
Yeah.
So, you know.
I would say that's definitely like not in the same way, but I think there is a culture when you come from a different background that's not Caucasian, at least in my experience, is that there's a different type of strictness that is associated with like having a family from any type of like different cultural background.
Yes.
Like I've really noticed that, or like there's a different attitude around like dating, marriage, finances, like all of the things that like are more typically lax. I feel like there's definitely a more like cultural connotation to them. And like I think being like half white American and then like half of that like bigger cultural connotation has always been kind of like a balancing act almost, because you want to like keep that part of yourself, like especially like as a woman, like if I decide to get rid of my last name when I get married, like, you know, like keeping certain things, like what do I want to keep if I have kids, what do I want to keep for myself and like my family, like what do I want to keep going, because I think like also as a woman, like
Yes.
that's this huge aspect of like being from a mixed culture, is like there's a specific experience for a man and there's a specific, I mean for everybody, but I think being like a woman with like a mixed race culture is a very different and like strange kind of polarizing experience and like lane to navigate, I would say.
Yes.
That's kind of like not even a question, it's just like something that occurred to me.
But
It's important to talk about, especially like how all of these like things intersect with each other.
Yeah, I'm about to say, because that's the thing is I've noticed in like previous conversations, like in the last episode, Andrea had mentioned like the role of like Hispanic men and like how they're very like you have to be macho and stuff, and so it's like you can't separate certain things, like they intersect and you just have to like deal with it as it is.
Exactly, yeah.
But yeah. Alrighty. the next question we have is, if one of your parents taught you their native language, but the other parent did not speak it, did it affect your dynamic with your parents? Were you closer with one over the other because of that shared language?
Okay, so I have an answer, but also like not an answer. So in Iran, if you don't know, they speak Farsi. It's a very like singular language. It's like if you go to like Afghanistan or like places like that, the language is very similar. There's places in Pakistan where they speak it because of Zoroastrianism like thousands of years ago. But it's such an ancient culture and it's so specific to that region that a lot of times it is passed down through your mother. It could be your father, but like my mom stayed at home with us. My dad worked a lot when I was a kid, and my mom didn't speak Farsi, so like it was just not realistic for them to have. Well, I'd always wish they had taught me, especially as I've gotten older, because like it's been a very singular experience. Like I just got back from visiting my dad's family, and like everybody in my family speaks Farsi, and I don't. And even though I love my family and like I interact with them still, like a lot of the times I like have no clue what's going on because they're always speaking in Farsi and I don't speak it. And I would say like that's been something I always wish my parents would do, so it didn't affect my closeness with them necessarily, but it's something I've gotten older that I'm like, I feel like my dad kind of has like this cop-out of like, oh, well, like, if we lived in Northern Virginia, there's more people that speak Farsi there, I would have put you in Farsi school. Well, like, you could have tried a little harder to like integrate us with that.
Yeah.
And then there's also like, I go by Taran because that's what my family decided to call me to make it easier for people to like pronounce my name. But my real name is Hedone, which is completely Persian, and that was a part of like when I was talking about like when you get married and stuff, my parents wanted me to have a first name that was Persian in case I decided to leave my like last name when I got married, so I'd always like carry that part of my identity.
Right.
And they kind of, I've always felt, especially as I've gotten older, that going by Taran I don't mind, but it was chosen for me, and it was made to be more palatable. And it's bothered me more as I've gotten older that like something that they gave me to like be a part of my culture was deemed like too difficult for people.
How do we whitewash you?
Yes, exactly. I mean like it's even like when subs like are reading a role and they stumble over my name, like sometimes I'll just be like here because I know it's me because like they just don't understand how to say it.
It's the ethnic pause.
Yeah, and like
the ethnic
And
pause.
then when there's like more, like when you're like in our homeroom class, there was like a couple people who were like South Asian, and then you, and then me, and we're all like R's and S's for our last name. And we'd be like here, like we like didn't know who was who.
But yeah, I would say like a part of like the native language, I wish I had learned it. I wish I had been closer to my family geographically so that I could have been more immersed in it. But on the bright side of that, the school I'm going to next year for university does offer like, I'm not taking it as a major, but Persian is like a major that you can take there, and so I'm going to take Farsi in university. And I think when you get older, my biggest recommendation for people that maybe would have had the same experience was you don't need to prove that that's your culture and that's your heritage to anybody, even if you don't speak the language. It doesn't make you less than. And also, you don't need to know it from birth. If you're interested in learning it, there are opportunities and you can do it yourself and practice. And what a great avenue to practice the language is having people like in such immediate access to you that you're able to speak with. So, long-winded answer, but that would be like my...
Yeah, no, I got you.
I can't relate.
Yeah.
Like I said, both my parents are American,
Yeah.
so they speak English. But the one thing that you said that I did, feel about was, how you said your name is spoken differently, but you could go by kind of like the whitewash name.
Yeah.
There's a kid that I work with. Her name is Michelle, but she goes by Michelle.
Yeah.
So, everyone tries to call her Michelle, like, hear her parents calling her that, like, all right, well, let's try to immerse her. But, it's just in a society where, well, if we can't pronounce your name, we're not going to pronounce it right. We're just going to give you a nickname.
Yeah.
So it's like, we don't want to ruin that culture, and also we just want her to, be who she is,
Absolutely. And I mean, it's not just like a me thing. Like my dad, his name has a really like Middle Eastern first name. My dad's name is Jafar, like the evil man from the Middle Eastern movie, the one Middle Eastern Disney movie. The villain, is my dad. And like when he was in high school, he went to high school in Northern Virginia, and everybody would call him James, and people would call my grandma's house, like, asking for James. And she was like, who is James? I don't even know how to say that name. Like, my grandma, like, does not speak English very well. So she's like, he's not home, like, there is no James here. And she would hang up on his friends because she was like, who is James? Or, like, my aunt's name is Sahela, but, like, she's a hair cutting company, and she goes by Susan because she lives in Arizona, and, like, white people in Arizona do not want to say her name.
I did not expect that.
It's not like my favorite thing, but I always think it's so funny sitting there and like speaking with like your ethnic friends and sitting there and being like, so what's your actual like what's the name and then what's the whitewash?
No, there's always like a difference, and it's like I'm both Taran and I'm Taran at the same time. I can be both and I can use both names, and one or the other doesn't offend me. But I do think when I'm in college, like, I'll probably start going by my full name because I'm definitely going to a new setting. And I feel like that's like a good time to kind of like maybe like try some things out, like decide which would I rather be called, and like what is more like what fits more for me at this stage of life. Yeah.
I was thinking actually that's really interesting because I was thinking a couple weeks ago I'd been talking to this girl and we were talking about like our specifically like last names and everything because she's telling me about her heritage and I was like learning about it and everything. And I remembered that like the way that we pronounce my I don't know if y'all have seen my last name. It's a mess of letters. And it gets the ethnic pause of like,
What is this?
What is it? Because I have Grace as my first name. That's very much an Asian mom trying to whitewash her child. Just throwing that out there. You're gonna meet a lot of Asian Graces. There's a lot of us. But like the way that you say Razat is not how you're supposed to say my last name.
Mm-hmm.
But we've said it like that for so long. And I looked at my dad and I was like, why don't we say it like the proper Polish way?
What is the proper way to say it?
Zezut.
Oh, that's cool.
That
sounds
that's
French.
really fun.
It's like, and that's you know how I spell it. It has, and that's why there's two Z's in it. And it's like that's using like the Polish like language rules because obviously all different languages have rules and everything. But I was like, Grace Zezut sounds way cooler than Grace Razan.
Literally, that sounds so
really cool.
awesome.
No,
Yeah.
but yeah, I was sitting there. I was like, maybe once we get to college, I'm just gonna start like.
There's different things when you have like a first or a last name, but specifically like my whole name. My middle name is Anne, also very white. But then they did the opposite with my brother. My brother's first name is Evan, and his middle name is Jafar. So they like mix it up a little bit. But like over Christmas break, my cousin, she's a bit older than me, and she's fully Iranian, and she was talking about when she studied abroad in Spain, and she got on a Eurail to go to Paris, and Paris has a bit of a reputation for being a little bit xenophobic sometimes. No hate to the French, but it is true. And when she was showing them her American passport, they told her, "What's this name of yours? This is a fake passport." And they got her like arguing with them so they could tell if she had like an accent or not, to see if they were like literally trying to like deport her because of the name on her passport. And I'm going to school internationally, and I never thought about that when I'm traveling.
You're gonna get deported.
I was like, Taran's gonna get deported. I was like, I never thought about like the fact that like with people in other countries, because I mean, there's a lot about American ethnicities, but we can also say like it's more of a mixing pot, I believe, than a lot of different places. Like you see a lot of different varieties of like Polish, like American, Middle Eastern, like all of these different places. And I guess I'm more used to that coming from here, where in like other places they might be used to it, but they also might be more vocal about not liking it. And I never like thought that could be like a danger to me in that way. So like on last names, yeah, thank you. Viva la France.
Yeah.
We're the French. Okay. What is it? Alrighty, so next question that we have are, what are your thoughts on people hold on, this question. Alright. What are your thoughts on people seeking a specific looking partner just to create pretty mixed babies, etc., black babies with green eyes?
Would you like to answer first, Regan? I feel like that's a problem that's more associated with like, I've seen it more with like the African American community than my own community, so I feel like maybe.
Because that's not, like honestly, I've talked to a lot of people, like not about that in a bad way, but it's like, you know, because I'm mixed, like, you know, what if because most of my boyfriends have been white, so it's like, well, would they be lighter white, or would they be like my color white? Would they be full white? Like, what kind of white? Would they be black? Because, you know, it's like, depending on, you know, where all the genes are coming
Genetics.
from. You know?
Genetics are strange.
Genetics, honestly, like, they can have red hair from nowhere, like, what? So, I mean, I've never really thought about that. I'm the type of person that doesn't really care when it comes to that sort of thing, but I'm also really weird, and I think about it a lot. I mean,
It's not too weird.
Yeah,
I mean, it's your
yeah.
life, like,
Yeah,
it's like could
you know.
be your future. You're
Yeah,
like,
I'm
oh,
like someone, I'm like, I wonder what our babies would look like. You know?
That okay. Alright, hold on.
She's planning ahead.
Yeah, I mean, as you should.
Yeah.
I'm about to say this is not going to work unless our babies are going to be cute. Sorry about it.
No, it's never really been a factor in like any of my relationships because none of them go here, so it doesn't matter. But I mean, anyway. But I mean, people who think like that, I feel like that just kind of dilutes what love is and like being in a relationship with somebody. Because like if you only care about someone for what they look like, then what's the point? But I like you said, like I feel like that does happen a lot in our community, especially, you know, light skins versus dark skins, you know, that sort of thing. You know, like, oh my gosh, like, you know, if I date this white boy and I marry him and he has blue eyes, are our kids gonna have blue eyes? Like, you can't know that. Like, you know, like, I don't know. Gen Z is weird when we come to dating. There's so many weird factors that should not be a factor.
I feel like maybe it is because our generation, there's definitely more of that mixed race. Like, there's more people of mixed race, I feel like. I don't have scientific proof for that.
I'm just like,
We're the stats here, come on.
Completely wrong.
We're the statistics.
Actually,
This is gonna come up in the future when you get famous, you marry rich and everything, and they're gonna be like, look, she was statistically wrong.
look, my apology video now if I'm wrong. But
I do feel like maybe that's why it could be. Like, because there's more of that thought about maybe like, oh, do I like wanna like marry? Because I do think about that as I'm like, I would like to like pass some of my own culture down to my kids, but also like if I marry like a white guy, then there'll be like only 1/4. And you know, sometimes with like people will really take that like 1/4 of like any ethnicity that's not Caucasian and they will run to the hills with it. And I do not want to be responsible for those actions.
No, I totally agree. Like, I have a friend who's Puerto Rican. He's like, well, you know, I'm 10% black, so, you know, I can do all this thing.
my
I'm
God.
like, stop.
Stop, please. Okay, this is a question for me. Is it racist to like? Okay, so like, is it racist? Ooh, that's a no, okay, so like, I'm sitting here because we're talking about types and everything.
yeah.
So it's like, is it racist to say that you're like, oh, my type is like white guys or like white girls or like white people? My type is white people.
I would not say so because my type is white guys. So
Taran's like, I am guilty.
I take responsibility. I am guilty.
But I will say, I feel like it's more of a personal opinion. I don't think so. I think when it crosses the line into like calling somebody like exotic or like
fetishizing
the fetishization, having an interest versus, that sounds weird.
having
I'm interested in white guys.
being like
What's your minor in college? I'm interested in white guys.
my minor. Oh my god, that's my nature.
I just think there's a difference between like having like a genuine relationship with somebody and then like they happen to be like of a different race or ethnicity, and then versus like actively seeking out somebody only of that race or ethnicity because you have like there's some type of, I mean, usually it's like a caricature. Like, I know, like, coming from the Middle East, there's like this like exotic like this like weird like they call it like, oh my god, what was the word they used to use, like Oriental to describe people from like the Middle East and East Asia, which is like, what?
Oriental.
like the rug, like the food, exactly, like what? And like this like pervasive stereotype of people from different cultures that crosses into like romantic interactions. I think when that's what you're searching for, then it becomes an issue. But then I would say, like, on the topic of like my parents aren't together because my mom's like specifically into a certain type of guy, and maybe they are. Who knows? We're not even gonna speculate. But I would say, like, I would notice that there is like I've noticed because my dad and I look so different that like sometimes like especially as I've gotten older when I go out with him, like people think that he's like my boyfriend or that I'm his girlfriend, and it's disgusting.
It's like
and
that
it's
weird, like,
gross. And it's like it's so hard. And I mean the reason it is like that is one, like it's part of like misogyny, but it is also I think a cultural type of thing. But yeah, I would say like that's a part, like that's something about like the romantic interactions between people of two races that I notice is like this weird fetishization of both people that are a product of mixed race relationships and people who are in mixed race relationships.
No, yeah, I definitely agree. We had a conversation literally about this on the bus, like
Oh,
freshman
really?
year. Yeah, Ruby was like, because I said that I
I have a recording of this somewhere on my Snapchat memories. Somewhere.
I said that I don't like dating, like I don't have a romantic interest in black people. Like I don't know why, I just don't, like for some reason in my brain, I'm just like, oh my gosh, my dad. I don't know why. No, please do not hate me. I don't know why. It just makes me uncomfortable. So, you know, I just haven't liked black guys, but, you know, I don't think it's racist at all. Like, I think it gets to a point where if you're like, oh my gosh, I think that all black people are ugly and gross. You know, if you start, like, stereotyping all of them, then I think that's weird. Because I have plenty of black friends. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I love all of you. I would just never be romantically attracted. Or maybe I could be. I just haven't been yet.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm like, well, you know. And like I said, all the guys I've dated are white. So.
I think it just comes down to like features, and then it's just like, oh, these features are just typically more prominent in this race.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
But who knows, man?
knows?
Dating's hard.
Yeah.
Dating's so hard. Gosh.
Weird. You can never predict like who you're gonna like, where they're gonna come from, what they look like.
No, sometimes you make a snarky comment under your breath, and then just it bowls you right over. It's so fun.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
For some people, that has happened.
Anyway, next question. Alrighty, so have you ever felt out of place with either one of your races because you weren't fully that race?
Definitely.
Always, constantly,
Always.
perpetually.
I mean, the things that stand out to me the most, is more like, less now that I'm older and I've more like embraced myself in a different way. Like, I honestly didn't even fully comprehend that I was mixed until like 7th grade maybe. Like, I'd never really considered it, because before that age, like when I thought of people who are mixed race, I typically, like being from an area that's mostly like black and white or like Hispanic and white, but predominantly white, I thought of mixed as someone who's African American and white. And that's who I thought of was like mixed race. And I didn't really realize until I got a little bit older and started being like exposed to more cultures, because this is a predominantly white area, that I was like, oh, wait a minute.
That's nice.
That's me? This is me?
Am I the problem? Am I the drama?
No, seriously. But I know I went to Betty Weaver Elementary, which is right by James River, and that is, I can't speak for it now, but at the time, in like the early 2010s, it was a very predominantly white school. And my parents were really the only like interracial couple that had kids there that I could remember. Mm-hmm. And so I do have like a lot of like vivid memories of like my family stood out. It stood out to kids, and kids are like curious and it can feel evasive. Mm-hmm. And I remember feeling like embarrassed, even though there was nothing to be embarrassed about. And I love my dad and I love my culture, but like I remember just like wishing that I was whiter and that I was like everybody else. But then it's the classic problem is like, you're too white, but you're not white enough. Yes. Which is, I feel like it's just universal for anybody of like a mixed race. Or someone who's just white passing in general. But I think like that's like a vivid memory I have. I know like one time when this didn't happen to me, it happened to my brother. But a little girl told my brother in elementary school that our dad was a terrorist. And that, I genuinely feel like that really affected him. And it affected my family and it affected me. Like, because even though no one said that to me, like, I'm sure someone thought, I mean, if it's one person, it's always more than one. Mm-hmm. And I think, like, especially growing up in the time that we did post 9/11, this was, like, 2010, 2011, mm-hmm. like, this type of thing, there was definitely, like, always kind of, like, a weird, like, connotation to, like, me being half Middle Eastern. Mm-hmm. It either, like, wasn't really addressed, or, like, people would like talk about it, like when we talk about like the anniversary of 9/11 and stuff, like people would like ask me about it when we were really young, which when you're young and you're curious, but like that there was never any intervention from my teachers on those subjects. Like no adult that ever overheard that was like, let me get involved. And I know like my mom, the little girl who called my dad a terrorist, her parents called my mom and were like, I don't know where she would have learned that from. And my mom was like, probably at home.
Your mom said, let me call you on
And
this.
yeah, and I think one time, like when my brother was little, he told my dad, you know, like if you were white, it would be easier. And I mean, it was never anything I said, but I feel bad about thinking it now. But at the time, I did feel that way. I did feel that way. If my dad was white, my life, even though my life wasn't hard, but my social interactions and the way people perceive me and the way I perceive myself and my name would have been easier for me. And so I think that would have been like my own struggles with like how race affected me and how like being too white and not white enough and like struggling to figure out like where I wanted to embrace before realizing I could balance both.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my story time. So I always give like the most long-winded answers. I'm so sorry. It's fine.
I think for me, a lot of people when you talk to me over the phone, like Miss Hewlett will talk about once, like I sound white
I
over the
remember
phone.
her saying that.
Yeah, you know, a lot of people don't realize that either, you know, one part that I'm black, but also just that I'm mixed. And there's a lot of part of the black culture, you know, people are like, well, black people kind of talk a certain way, and you know, they all have weaves and they all do all this stuff, and I'm like, not every single black person does that. It also depends on your hair. You know, when I listened to the black community this morning, I was like, oh yeah, I was just thinking about that. You know, people are like, well, can white people wear weaves, and can white people do this? And it, you know, it's more of your hair type and how you choose to, you know, deal with it that way. But, you know, I've been told by a lot of people, even by my dad, like, oh my gosh, you talk ghetto. And I'm like, I just talk the way that I talk. You know, I pick things up. I'm the type of person where, like, if you say something, I'll say it. Like, for the rest of my life. I still say boomer. I still say it. You know, I'm that type of person where I'm very easily influenced. And since, you know, growing up around a lot of white people, I guess I took a lot of the white characteristics from when I was a child. And, you know, I don't eat soul food. I've eaten soul food, I think, once, and it was from a friend of mine whose mom made it. And so they're like, well, you don't eat soul food, how can you be black? Or, you know, you don't talk a certain way, how can you be black? You know, oh, it's just your mom, you know. And I hung out with a lot of my mom's family. I didn't see my dad's family as much because I lived in Henrico. My mom's family lived like 10 minutes down the street. But, you know, when I was a kid, that was like, why do I have to be black? Like, why do I have to be white? Like, why can't I just be both? Because I never saw color, I guess, when I was a kid. I was just like, well, I'm me. I've never cared about it much. And, you know, now going into high school, you know, I kind of think about it a lot. I'm like, all right, well, I don't see, you know, I see a lot of black people, I see a lot of white people, I see a lot of Asians, I see a lot of Hispanics, but, like, you know, the mix, like, you know, should I be one? Should I just be black? Should I just be white? Or should I just be who I am? And so that is kind of, you know, I've thought about it a lot. So, I don't know. I still haven't decided.
Because you can ponder it for so long, but it's
Yeah.
almost like you just run yourself in circles. Like you
Yeah.
come to different conclusions.
Yeah.
I see
Because
that.
I can't be white. I can't, that's why I'm sorry, I can't. Like, you know, I want to say that I'm black, but, you know, then there's a lot of things where, like, you know, the black community, and we'd be like, well, you don't fit in. I'm like, okay, well, I've got a white committee. Well, you know, you don't do this and you don't do that. And I'm like, well, I can't go to either, so, like, what do I do now?
It's all the mixed kids sitting there just being like, it's the mixed kids having a Socratic seminar.
For real. Leadership English every single year.
Every single year, Socratic seminar.
It's
mixed
always
kids
ends up being
have
about being mixed and like that culture or feminism.
feminism. Yes, but I think it's really interesting because we're all sitting here, and I'm sensing this common trend of like when it comes to choosing a side, it sounds like when we were, especially when we were younger and you're impressionable as a child, that we wanted to choose our white sides. Because it's easier. Hi, being white in America is easier than being ethnic in America. Newsflash! At least that's been my personal experience, and I'm assuming it's also been y'all's.
Definitely, yeah.
And so it's just like this sense of like, I want to be white, but like as I've gotten older and like embraced the culture, I'm just kind of like, oh. I think it also, another interesting point is like beauty standards and like white beauty standards.
Yeah.
It's so that is a topic. It's so interesting how like specifically for mixed people, it's interesting how you kind of teeter in between these two, but then there's always like an element of that fetishization that we were talking about that will always apply to you in like a weird way. Especially like my hair is a little bit darker than it was like when I was born. Like I used to be like a lighter brown, now I dye my hair a darker brown. And like now that I like wear a little bit of makeup and stuff, like a lot of people will tell me like I look more Middle Eastern than I did when I was younger, which is true. I think like over time that's kind of like my features have kind of like adjusted like as they do when you get older. And that's definitely like affected the way people view me more, not in a positive or negative way, but it's a perception of me, even if it's not negative or positive. And like I like who I am and I like going between those cultures, but the beauty standards of two different, especially like the food culture is so different. I mean, just beauty standards body-wise in America are like a whole nother thing. In the world, they're a whole nother thing. But like I recently had an experience, I don't know if either of you guys, this has happened to you, but I was with my dad's family over break in Arizona, and we always have like tea, and they have like kind of like pastry things. They're like small, but it's like little cookies and stuff that you eat. And I'd just been on like a plane for a long time. I was starving. We had like Persian food. It was Yelda, which is like winter solstice, and that's like a holiday. So we were like eating, not drinking, but like drinking tea. And I like grabbing a cookie, and my aunt was like, "That's enough." And I was like, and then I was like, "Fine, like I won't eat it." And she's like, "No, eat it, eat it." And then it's the same as like if you eat like 2 plates, instead of asking like, "Oh, did you like the food?" It's not, "Oh, did you like the food?" It's, "You didn't like it." And then you just have to say, "No, I did like it." But there's no like, "Oh, did you like it?" It's just, "You didn't like it. You didn't like it."
It's just weird.
No, I know. And it's like this weird simultaneous thing with your body where it's like you need to eat more, but you also need to eat less and literally be like the size of a paperclip, even though like when like you're a part like different like ethnicities in parts of the world, like your body type is different, your genetics determine your body type, and like there's so many different things that go into those like beauty standards culturally, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the beauty standards of like Black Americans, because I mean, you know, there's plenty of people out there that are like absolutely gorgeous, and I'm like, well, I could never do that. But you know, like I mean, just at home, like my dad doesn't say really anything about like my body. I mean, he says things about like, you know, you should be more feminine, but that's just the traditional side of him that we're not going to talk about.
That's the patriarchy.
Yeah. But my mom was always like, you need to eat less. I'm like, but all I did was eat what you gave me for dinner. She's like, well, actually, you need to not do that. Because, you know, I have my own money now, so I go out, I get my own food. And she's like, well, you need to not do that. And, you know, and it's like kind of what I was raised on. I wasn't, you know, really raised on, you know, going outside and doing all this stuff. My dad's like, well, back in the day, you know, like 50 million years ago, we actually went outside. We actually played with our friends. No, it's like I did when I lived in my old neighborhood. I moved, but I had like 6 different friends. We'd always go outside and hang in my backyard. Like we would never stop playing. But, you know, now that I got here, you know, I'm older, like, I'm a video gamer. Yeah. My dad's always like, well, why don't you go outside like we did? I'm like, because
I don't want to.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm a teenager now. But, yeah, my mom's always like, well, you don't get enough exercise, you know, you eat too much. And it's like, you know, and then she's always looking at Instagram and doing all these things. It's like, you know, they let all this stuff influence their brains. And it's like, you know, well, my body's not the same as yours, you know?
It's different,
Yeah, like, I've had so many people say, that's your mom? Like, yes, because she's very white. My dad is very black. And I don't know. I don't look like either one of them, personally. I mean, you know,
like that in-between standard like, measure of those two.
Yeah, but honestly, like, if I stood next to them, they'd probably be like, you probably couldn't be able to tell that I am the product of them, you know? And it's just weird, you know, trying to be like, well, you should do this. My dad tries to tell me things to do with my hair. My mom tells me to do things with my hair. And I'm like, Mom, I don't have straight hair. I can't do the same things that you do. My dad has really, really tight curls, but, you know, he doesn't have that much hair. So he's like, well, you need to do this stuff. I'm like, but I can't. You know, I can't take your stuff. My body's not the same. You know, it gives me body care stuff. I'm like, well, that's not the same for you as it is for me. And it's just, you know, it's also, you know, men versus women. You know, there's different needs and all that. But it's really weird to try to find an in-between. Because I have, like, 5 different hair types in this, whatever this is, you know. I don't know where I got it from. But, you know, it's that type of thing where you kind of have to find your own person, and then you also have to find ways to take care of your own person.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to be the same on both sides, so it's fun.
I agree.
Yeah.
Beauty standards, man. You never win. You never win, regardless of what race you are. You're never gonna win.
No.
Nobody ever does. That's the game.
You always lose.
Yes. Alrighty. And then we have our second to last question, which is, actually, we have two more questions. So, how did being told to pick a side, referring to your race/ethnicity, impact your self-image, and how do you associate with your culture? So, this infers that we've been told to pick a side, which I think we all have.
Yeah, it's I think in different ways.
Like, it's never been like someone needs to be like, you need to choose. But I mean, even things as simple as like, when you're doing things for college, like picking like what your ethnicity or nationality is, like, even though like I don't have my official Iranian passport, by birth I'm an Iranian citizen.
Mm-hmm.
But does that mean my nationality is Iranian? Should I put that down as well as American? And like my ethnicity, like, because some people consider Iran white and some people consider it Asian, is it right for me to say that I'm like mixed with white and Asian, or should I just say white and other? Like, there's been a lot of times where I just put other because there was no like Middle East or like something, but then if they do have like Asia, they'll say Pakistan, but Pakistan's next to Iran, but there's no Iran anywhere on there, so I'm like, I don't know what to do. So I guess even in those simple ways, you're told to like choose a side.
Yeah.
And then like in the more like obvious way, I mean more subtle ways, not obvious, just kind of like what we were all saying is like we used to gravitate towards one side when we were younger and more impressionable, and now that we have a better sense of ourselves, we typically gravitate towards our more like cultural or like other racial identity. And I think like that's a way that society shifts and like your perception of yourself shifts, and in that way I guess you can choose sides, because it's hard to balance two things and two identities at once and two different like cultures, and I think it's just like a balancing act that you have to get used to when you're a person of like a mixed race.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, especially with like all of the things that are going on, you know, just like when people think of racism, there's always like black and white. Like, of course, there's always, you know, Asian against white, or, you know, Middle Eastern and all this stuff, you know, there's always that, but most people always think of black and white, and so it's always kind of like, how can we make black and white not be so black and white, you know? And I haven't necessarily felt like I've needed to choose a side, like you said, you know, there's things like that, but there's always like the black and American, and there's always like white, and I can check multiple boxes, so I have that. But, you know, sometimes, you know, when people are like, so what are you? I say I'm black, because, you know, if I'm mixed, most of the time you infer, well, the other side is white. I definitely have friends that aren't like that. Like, I have a friend who's Indian and Chinese, and so she's definitely got some really cool things going on in her house, but, you know, I always just kind of say more that I'm black, not only that you can tell by my skin tone, you know, because I'm, like I said, not white, but, oh, sorry.
This occasionally.
Okay.
It did this last episode as well. It does it occasionally. You're talking about black and white?
No, like I said, I will choose for you.
It said you said black, alright.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, I think now if I had to choose, I would say that I am more black, because I feel like that would represent me more than saying I'm white. Not only just because of my skin tone, but just the way that I am and the way that I've been raised. I mean, I have been raised in a white community, but I feel like a lot of my ideals aren't what most people would say would be white, because I've been introduced to both sides, and now I have to find a way to choose what I want. And I don't want what all white people want, I don't want what all black people want, you know, I don't fit into the stereotypes of either one, you know, so I would say I'm more black now, just, you know, especially with my dad. He's been talking to me more about things, you know, going into the world, like, hey, you know, you're going to get this, you're going to get that. You know, my mom can't really say that, you know, because she's, you know, the white privilege, stuff like that, you know. She doesn't really think about it, you know, things just come to her. And so my dad has to be the one to be like, all right, let me break this to you, let me tell you how things are going to be. You need to, you know, start being a lot more cognizant of where you are, who you're with. My aunt has told me so much about her and my cousin, because she's now in the world, you know, like, this is what's going to happen to you, you know, because of your skin tone. There are going to be people who are going to do this, people are going to do that, you know. I'm trying to help you out here. So I would say that if I had to choose, you know, I would be more on the black side, but I definitely embrace them.
Yeah, I would say the same for me. And I think one of those things about getting older is, I mean, Iran, there's definitely, like, there's a lot of oppression that goes on there, and there's a lot of people in my family who, you know, like, they can't afford medicine for their kids or for themselves because of inflation. And I think it's a misrepresented community because of the way it's villainized in a way. And I think, I mean, just in general from the Middle East, like so many refugees, so many people who seek asylum, that's something that like I'm really gravitating towards, and that's something that I've learned a lot about in the past like 2 to 3 years of my life, and that like I want to like continue working with as I get older, because I feel like my white identity, I mean, I obviously like I want to help correct things that are wrong in the community that I pass as, and that is white. But at the same time, I think my identity as an Iranian, that voice needs to be heard, especially from an American perspective, and that contribution needs to be had to the world. And I do think that I identify much more with that side of myself because of the richness of the culture, but also because of, I feel like how much I want to contribute to helping people from that side of my identity.
Oh, that makes sense. Those are very thoughtful responses. All right, and so we have our second to last question, which is, have you ever experienced racism towards a parent or other intolerance towards them being a mixed couple? How did you internally respond? And I think we briefly touched on the racism against a parent, but...
A little bit.
We're like, well,
all right, everyone.
For all three of us and say blanket answer, yes. One specific, I can say one specific instance about like my parents as an interracial couple actually comes from my own family. On my mom's side, an aunt of mine. Like was having a little bit too much to drink in a time of grief, and called my parents after my brother was born, so like 2000, 2001, and never like outwardly like said, like, not that I know of that she like say slurs or anything, but she said like that lifestyle, and her husband's in the back like, yeah, that's right. What?
Their hands have been on.
No, for real. Oh, but yeah. So like that lifestyle, or even like one time, like and I wouldn't say like my white grandparents aren't racist, but my grandpa, like sometimes he'll just say like weird stuff, like first of all, we're not even Syrian, but one time he tried to tell my dad that there are blonde-haired and blue-eyed Syrians, and like that's why like Jesus is represented as white in the Bible, and I was like, I'm pretty sure it's not that reason. I'm sure there are Syrians with blonde hair and blue eyes. But first of all, blonde hair and blue eyes are not synonymous with whiteness. And second of all, the reason they portray Jesus as white is because of eugenics and racism. But anyways, I was like, why do you have to bring that up? And it's like, it's not anything you talk about with anybody else. So that would be like my family experience. And I did touch a little bit on my experience of like facing racism because of my dad's skin color. So pass it on to Regan.
I think there have been a couple my dad has come home because like he works with Verizon, so he's definitely out, he's talking to people, and he's come home and talked about a lot of experiences that he's had with people, you know, being openly racist towards him, you know, and he's like, well, this is what happened at work. Yeah.
Yeah, cut the phone lines, I'll be shy. I'll be like,
yeah. But there was one time we went to Food Lion, like after school, I guess, or something, to go get something to eat and all that. And so we got everything, we got in line, and then, you know, there's baggers and all that. And so I guess the person wasn't really like, oh my gosh, like, oh, he's a black person. So like, they didn't hand him the bags, they just kind of like dropped it. And it was like, I guess you gotta go pick it up. So it was really like, cause I was like 7, so
That woman is shocked.
like,
The woman was too stunned to speak.
I just like, I can't even like conceptualize like doing that to another person. Like I don't even, like I know there's like a million different like things, but like the idea of like doing that to somebody is just like so like outlandish to me that I like couldn't even imagine like thinking that way.
Yeah, yeah, like, and like as a child, I'm like, well, I'm like, I go with my mom, and I'm like, but they always hand me the groceries. They always hand me the groceries, and I like, you know, whatever. But it was really weird, and my dad never said anything. I think we got in the car, and then maybe he might have mentioned it, but other than that, it was like, okay. And so it's really weird. And when I was younger, my mom used to always tell me, oh, everyone thought you were Indian. I'm like, what? I'm like, okay. She's like, I don't know, I guess that's just what you look like. And I was like, oh, okay. So I guess when I was younger, my mom got treated a different way too. So it was that's definitely interesting.
Yeah, that's another thing about being mixed is like the difference between somebody being mixed with African American and somebody, or Black in general, and somebody being mixed with like an Asian country.
Yeah.
And there's a different standard. Like my dad said something about that once. He was like, people, well, because he's a person of color and he's brown. Actually, he has like a very similar skin tone to Regan, even though he's a completely different side of the world. But he would say like white people would try and be like, well, I don't understand why some Black people like can't get out of their situation, but you can. And my dad's like, because I did not face systemic oppression in this country. I came here like 40 years ago. Like I'm not. It's not like my family's American and has been here for hundreds of years and been oppressed by this system.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as if he hasn't faced hardships, but it's very different. There's very different like societal conceptions of that. And definitely, I'd say there's been much more racism towards people who are a mixed race couple of Black and white than there has been towards my parents, just because of the way society sees like immigrants versus African Americans and Black people in America.
And I mean, honestly, like just within my family, like I know I probably shouldn't think about that, but you know, as a young child, it's really weird because I'm just going to like on my mom's side, because most of the sides they don't mix. Like even though they're perfectly fine, they all like each other. We just don't have family gatherings. And so whenever I go to my mom's side, it's always weird because like if my dad doesn't go, I'm like the only person of color. I'm like, this is weird, you know? Like I mean, I know everybody, everyone knows me, but like sometimes we go to a Christmas party at my mom's aunt's house, and there are so many people who come up to me and be like, oh my gosh, I haven't known you since you were like a little baby. And I'm like, I don't know who you are.
I don't know who you are.
I'm like, I feel cornered. Help me. And I'm like, I mean, my dad's normally there, but he always has like, you know, some beers and he hangs out with some guys that he knows. But I just like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, I don't know any of these people. And not only do I feel like that, but I'm also like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like white. No. It's my family, and I love them. But sometimes when there's a lot of white people, it scares me.
Yeah, no, felt that.
Valid.
I mean,
It just does.
felt that, but
Don't even
that.
apologize.
I have so many white friends, and I love all of them, and I have so much white family, and I love all of them. It just sometimes it scares me.
I mean, yeah, it's like when you're like the only one in a room, that's like a certain way. It's like I mean, not completely, but I mean, like even if you're like a woman walking into a room, you're like, like what's going on here? Like it's, I mean, obviously different. But like the similar situation. So I feel like that's valid.
Yeah, it just, you know. And then when I go to my dad's side, my uncle, well, my cousin is light-skinned because his mom was light-skinned. So I think there's some white there. I don't know. I just know he's light-skinned. So I feel a little bit more okay about it because my dad's side of the family is like, they're not like dark, but they're definitely, you know, darker. So it's like, all right, cool. And then my, because, you know, my mom's white, and then my uncle's girlfriend right now is white, so there's a little bit more diversity going on in there than it is in my mom's side. So I feel a little bit more okay. And they're a lot more chill, even though they're a lot more, like, Jesus-oriented, and sometimes it scares me with that.
That's a whole other thing.
I know, I just get scared.
Regan just gets scared at family. Family gatherings are scary in general, guys.
Honestly, like, bro, going to a Black barbecue with like another friend's family is a whole different story. If you haven't heard about the Black barbecues, you should. Is it enough time already? It's 2:57.
Seniors.
Oh my gosh.
And don't forget, do whatever you gotta
Alrighty.
do.
Well, very impromptu closing. I'm so sorry for that.
See you all tomorrow.
Hold on.
Everyone else, wait for that bell. 3 o'clock is approaching.
Alrighty, ladies and gents, I'm so sorry for this very impromptu closing of the episode. Remember to be kind to each other, and we gotta go, guys.